G'day guys, Ben and Ads here. So we were watching the project last night and Scott Pape was on there talking about helping your children manage their money correctly, and although I didn't think about that exactly, a question that came to mind was, am I going to be able to keep investing in property once I start raising a family? As someone who doesn't have a family at this stage in life, it's something I probably should think about more because it is on my plans for the near future. So I just wanted to ask Ben a few questions about, is it possible, and I guess get a bit of an idea of his experiences going through that.
For sure, like I bought, I think 5 or 6 properties before I had a family.
Okay, so you were well worn into it by that stage.
I was wearing myself into it pretty hardcore. I did have a family really young too. I think I had my first daughter when I was 27. But then I've also bought another 5 or 6 properties since I started having a family, and now we've got 3 children as well. So I suppose regardless of which side of the fence people are at, it's definitely possible, but it hasn't been bloody easy either.
That's perfect you said that, because now I'm thinking, what's the difference between beforehand and afterwards? Like, what was the thought? Like, obviously, from a mortgage broker, I know the lending was a little bit tougher, but from your perspective, like, how did you view it and how did you approach the situation differently?
So before I had children, you know, and you might be able to reaffirm this, bro, like I just completely lived for myself, and that's the reality. Like I was living for me and what Ben wanted and what Lisa, my wife, and I wanted for our future, which was financial independence and holidays and a good life.
Yeah.
So the motivation at that time was all around us and what we wanted. And then as soon as we had children, this crazy wave of motivation came over the top of me, and it was kind of like, well, we've really got to get our shit together, because every single day of my life I'm trading my time away from them for money, effectively.
So did that feel like you sped things up, or you changed that, or you became more aggressive with your strategy? Because if anything, it seems like you became more conservative from the outside looking in. But
that's a really good point, man, because I would say from the outside looking in, it was more conservative as an approach.
Yeah.
But I've done the same amount of activity in that 5-year period of time that I did in the 5 years before that.
Okay.
I've just done it in a completely different way. So I've changed my strategy now to really orientate towards lower risk.
Yeah.
And, you know, more guaranteed returns, as opposed to the speculation that I was doing before I had the kids, and, you know, just shooting and hoping that I, you know, hit something, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I definitely know what you mean with that one. That's definitely how my first property started, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost everyone's first property that doesn't get help, you know what I mean? Like, you bought, actually you've made money on yours and I made good money on mine. Yeah. And there was an art to the science of that as well, but, you know, looking back, we didn't have $100 million to go and buy our first property with either. So you've got to start with where you are. Yeah,
exactly. And you try and hit as many of the things that you want and that you think's important to getting a good property, but you got to kind of prioritize and decide what are the big rocks and what are the small rocks.
For sure.
So I guess to get a bit of an idea of, say, myself in the future when I'm trying to lend for, or sorry, not lend, but try and purchase my next investment property with children, is it alright if we run through a little bit of a case study that we can kind of go by and just see what you would recommend for that sort of scenario?
100%.
So if you've been approached by a young family, let's say they're 30 years old, the mum and the dad, and they've got a young child who's 12 months old, let's say.
Yeah.
So they're dealing with having a new children still. They've kind of got a hang of it, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a parent.
But, man, I didn't get the hang of it in 12 months. It's taken like 6 years to get the hang of it, and we still don't have it.
So should we say a 2-year-old child is 1 year old a little bit too quickly?
If anyone's got the hang of raising children, can you please put some parenting advice at the comment section in this vid?
So if we've got that scenario and they own their own home at the moment, they don't own it outright, they've got a mortgage it, let's say they've got a $500,000 property and a $350,000 loan against it, they've managed to save $50,000 up in the bank.
Sure.
And they're now thinking about investing in property, but they feel like it may be too much risk, or they're not comfortable doing so with the uncertainty of having a young child around. So I guess to kick it off, where would you begin trying to decide on if it's the right choice for them, and should they be moving forward now or waiting till later on?
It's such a good question, man, because when you have children, there's never a good time to invest because it takes your attention away from the family. Like, let's face it, all of our lives as parents is about, well, for me, because family is such a strong value for me, is just spending time with them. And so it's never a good time to invest in property when you've got children, but it's never a better time either because you're physically locked down in the home and it's really difficult to go anywhere at night. You've got all of this time that you might have spent socialising or lunching or dinnering in the past, you know what I mean, that you sort of don't do as much of when you start having kids. So I think the very, very first step is to go, it's going to be stressful and a bit uncomfortable, and it's getting us outside of our comfort zone, but it's going to be a lot easier than having a child. So, you know what I mean? Like, let's get real about this. Having a child is by far the hardest thing that most people go through because it rocks the boat so much. So I think, like always, you know, that example sounded like they're in a great financial position.
Yeah, so they managed to save up a bit of money in that case, and I know there's a lot of situations that you obviously won't be in that quite of a situation at that point in life, and there's still some savings to do, or you might be focused on just paying down your home loan, so you've got a little bit of equity or a little bit of a buffer there.
Yeah, like just as a side note before we come back to that, I remember when I bought I think it was my fourth or my fifth property just as I was having my first daughter. And I'm just thinking back, like I'd stop counting them because you do stuff and it becomes less about the numbers and more about just getting on with the job and what you want to do. And I remember sitting there and like going to buy this property, and my wife was pregnant. It was the middle of summer in Queensland and she was wearing a trench coat basically while we talked to the bank manager to get this loan over the line. I'm glad there's responsible lending in Australia now, because after the GFC it was a bit of a cowboy show. And so, you know, we're sitting there trying to get this loan over the line, and I literally, you know, again, I'm not condoning what I did. It was so stupid looking back, but I didn't have the money for the stamp duty, so I used the credit card to pay for part of the stamp duty and just went, you know, a bit rogue. At that time in my life, I was very much, you know, this is the last property we're going to be able to buy in a while because we're losing an income stream and stuff, and I really wanted to get it done. Yeah. And we did what we needed to do at that time, but looking back, it was so dumb and we'd never do that again.
So that's our advice for all the listeners out there. If you want to get an investment property, get a big credit card, load it up, and let's get going.
That is not our advice.
So I guess to say, in that perspective, what could you have done differently to not put yourself in that position?
That's where I was coming. So, you know, this example where you've got some money in the bank, I think having a family, it's always important to keep a good cash buffer. And because you also had equity in their home, you know, you could potentially go to your mortgage broker and ask them, you know, to review your situation. You might have one income, you might have 1.5 incomes, you might just have, you know, 2 full incomes at this stage again, because I know my wife went back to work, you know, part-time almost immediately after the bug, like after the 5 weeks baby bonus was over, she was sort of back at it because we needed it at that time in our life. Like a lot of us do, like living's expensive. So go talk to the broker, find out if you can borrow money and how much. And just because they say you can borrow 700k definitely doesn't mean you should go and spend it.
No,
you know,
of course not.
Target what you can afford and what's appropriate for you. But yeah, that's always the starting point. And in that example, you know, based on an income of say $80,000 for the bloke, it sounds like there'd probably be some potential to start a conversation, if nothing more.
Yeah. And to get that process moving forward towards buying their first investment property.
Yeah.
So in that situation, do you think it would be better for them to access equity out of their property that they've got, or do you think it would be more prudent for them to keep saving, try and use their savings towards purchasing that first investment property? Or where do you see that? Because you mentioned the cash buffer, and I'm just trying to think, is it better to hold on to some of that cash and access equity, or yeah, which way to go about it? Would you recommend?
Look, your background is obviously, Ads used to work as a mortgage broker for one of the biggest companies in Australia, so you know, what would you recommend someone have done? You know, again, this isn't advice for your situation in any way. You've got thoughts which you'll explain, and I'll explain mine as well. But you know, what would you have, like, let's pretend that person was coming to talk to you.
Yeah, look, I'm not an accountant and I'm not a financial advisor, so take this for a grain of salt and obviously get specific advice. But personally, I would be looking to borrow the money against my owner-occupied home as an investment loan. That way it becomes, or generally is, tax deductible debt, making sure that it's lent the right way.
Sure.
And then I'd be looking to keep cash as a buffer and only put in what I need to be able to top it up and make that next loan work for the investment purchase.
And why would you have done that? What's the rationale behind that?
One is you get the cash buffer that you've mentioned before, so you get a little bit more of a backup there.
Yep.
2, you get the extra tax deduction on the interest on the loan. Even though you are borrowing up to 100%, either way I look at it, you're still kind of just shuffling around money, and you'll be in the same asset to debt position or ratio as what you would be either way. So let's try and make the most of that, and you make sure we're getting those tax deductions.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I've actually only ever used cash to buy investment property. I know there's heaps of different ways to go about that. You know, in the good old days, you're able to only put down 5 and 10% deposits for investment properties, and because property prices were a lot cheaper than they are now, it was easier to, you know, just save up a 5 or a 10% deposit and go again. And the bank also let you put the stamp duty and lender's mortgage insurance onto the loan as well. So
yeah, you're sitting up around 100% there.
Things have changed a lot, and you know, again, I would never do that now. I put down much bigger deposits, but I've always, you know, despite the tax benefit, I'm always looking for true financial freedom, and that means putting down bigger chunks of cash to pay for properties and then paying off the debt as quickly as I can. Now, depending on where you're at and what your goal is, there's so many different ways to do the same thing. That's just been my preference, and I've obviously had a business which not everybody has either, which has allowed me to save a little bit more money. And because I was working for sort of 70 hours a week for 4 years, I didn't have much to spend it on, and because I was going through having children, we were saving a lot more than we probably would have before that. Okay. So it was just easier to get the cash together.
So in that situation with your owner-occupied home loan that you'd have, would you be focusing on trying to pay that down as quick as possible, or where's the focus of your funds go?
It's so interesting, bro. Like when I was starting out, like, you know, with this example, I accumulated my properties first.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the reality is if you were to buy your own home and then one investment property, and, you know, you pay off your own home in 30 years and you pay off the investment over 30 years as well, the reality is you're only going to have one income stream at that time in the future, which is you can have all of this equity on paper, but you're only going to have one cash income stream through your deposit. Through your rent, sorry. So you're still not going to be financially free going that way. And I realised that really quickly after reading Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad book, that I'd need more than one asset owned outright to retire on.
Okay.
So what I did is I bought a couple of investment properties, then I bought my own home, then I bought a couple of extra investments.
Yeah.
And it's just been recently, as you know, that I've started to sell some of those investments now that they've reached maturity 3-5 years after I bought them. And I've used that cash to pay off my home.
Yeah.
And now that I've paid off my home, I'm just starting to pay off investment properties or reinvest those gains into other properties again now that I know more.
Yeah, so it's almost like you held off paying down your home loan.
Didn't pay $1 off it. Yeah,
focused on purchasing investments that would give you a potential to earn some more money to then put that back into paying off the home at the end of that cycle, or which you've kind of gone through now. So that second stage, you're going back into the next cycle of that. Is that right?
For sure. Like I'm rinsing and repeating exactly what worked for me first time round.
Yeah.
And the way I describe this, like on an examples perspective, is I bought a home on the Central Coast in 2011 for $200K. I just renovated and resold the property for $550,000. I put down a 10% deposit at that time, so I walked away with like $350,000 cash.
Yeah.
That $350,000 cash, I could never have saved that over the last 7 years. So I used that $350,000 cash after I, got smashed by tax to pay, a really good chunk off my home that quickly.
Yeah.
And I sold a few properties like that enabled me to pay off the debt. And that's what people that don't see things like that do. They work so hard to pay off their own debt using that 20 or 50 grand a year that they can pay off outside of their wage.
Yeah. When
they could have just bought one extra property 10 years ago and been patient. I didn't touch the property, literally didn't even think about it for 7 years. Came back, renovated it to sell it at the right time, and exited it out. And I'm not saying it's always going to be that easy or property's going to double in 7 years. That was a lucky one.
Yeah.
But even if the property goes up by 100 or 200 grand over the next 10 years and you've got one or two of them, just think about how much harder that is to physically save when you're earning, you know, my wife and I bought our first 5 properties earning less than 80 grand a year combined. Like we weren't earning good money at all because we were just starting out our careers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We were just really good at saving and really, you know, good at working the banking system at that time.
Well, I guess knowing that you had a combined income of 80 grand, that it also ties back into why you were a little bit more aggressive earlier on, because you know there was that potential to have 2 incomes in the future that could be much higher than that, hence why you were very aggressive earlier on in that period. If we go back to the case study, I guess, talking about, let's call them Todd and Hannah. So in their position, we've talked a little bit about where we'd spend our money. With their 50,000, they could be thinking about paying off the home loan, but obviously you think it's much more important to start collecting those investments or collecting those assets that are going to help speed up that process. What should they be thinking about for their first purchase then? Like, we've decided that's probably the best use of their money. What should they be thinking about before going into that first investment?
That's a really good question. I think there's 4 things that, you know, when you're thinking about your first investment that you need to be focusing on, and I missed all 4 of these on my first one. So, you know what I mean? You can still do alright if you miss them, as long as you've got a long-term strategy or you just fluke buying after a GFC.
Yeah.
But the reality is...
That'd be nice.
That was, you know, like timing, you know what I mean? Like there's a whole lot of things that come into play that are outside of your control, you know. But if you're starting right now, the first thing is timing, which means probably for the immediate future avoiding Sydney and Melbourne.
Yeah. And
looking at southeast Queensland, because it has sat flat for 10 years up here, but historically it's performed as well or better than Sydney and Melbourne over 50 years. So timing is the first thing to get your head around, and you can do that by reading the Heron Todd White report and just, you know, having a look at where Australia's at.
Yeah.
The second thing is buying for capital growth, which we all know is important, and that is how our parents and our friends who own property have got wealthy, because they've held great properties in great locations that have gone up in value.
Yeah.
So the best way to, you know, nail capital growth is to just buy really good quality areas that people want to live.
Yeah.
And that people want to invest in, like cities or big regional markets around the cities.
Okay, so is that where you see those capital growth areas, predominantly just sticking to the cities?
100%.
Okay.
You know, we're talking as close to Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane as you can afford. You know, within 20 k's or as close to the beaches connected to those cities as you can be.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that not everyone's got $1 million to go play the game in Sydney or Melbourne. In fact, none of us do. So that's why I like 20 k's from Brisbane right now, where you can still buy for 400 to 450k.
Yeah.
And get what you could have bought in Sydney or Melbourne 15, 20 years ago.
Of course. And yeah, like you've touched on before, if we can see Brisbane performing as well as those markets do, that makes a lot of sense.
For sure. Now, the third thing to me is cash flow.
Yeah.
This wasn't important to me back in the day because I didn't understand it. But the reason cash flow is so important to me is, and it should be to you as well, is if you can buy properties that don't cost you $1 to hold, then they're increasing in value without affecting your lifestyle or most importantly your family in any way.
Yeah.
It's really tough when you go from 2 incomes to 1. And it's really nice to get a property that gives you some extra cash flow, or if nothing else covers itself before taxes, so that it's not placing you or your family in any financial hardship.
Okay. And I know what you've touched on before in like our conversations, but so you believe it's possible to get both of those things at the moment?
100%.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. And there's heaps of different ways to get them, which we've talked about in other videos, but you could buy a house and you could, you know, learn how to build a granny flat.
Yeah.
You could buy an unrenovated house and give it a paint job and a carpet and increase the return that way.
Yeah.
You know, you could buy just in the right market at the right time, like a Brisbane right now, for example. There's so many different ways to get that same result.
Yeah. And what's number 4 then?
The 4th thing is I like to buy a property with a little bit of potential to add some value.
Okay.
Now, that's just because I like to buy at good prices and make some money.
Yeah.
That might not be everybody's cup of tea. In fact, 80% of the clients that we work with that are like Todd and Hannah want to just buy very, very low maintenance. And when I was buying properties straight after the kids, as you've noticed, everything has been very close to brand new and I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
And that's just because I just didn't have the capacity to think about renovating at that time. But now we're, you know, sort of through having the 3 kids, I'm starting to get more excited, which is why you can see the renovation project we're starting to do again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we've got time.
look, that sounds fantastic. Do you think that is achievable though for someone like Todd and Hannah in their position? Because hearing all that, it's like, yeah, let's go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
But obviously knowing that we've got limited funds to play with right now, not limited, they've done quite well for themselves in this position.
Yeah.
But how do they make all those things work? Is it something that they should go for all those things at the same time, or is it, do I prioritize one or number 2 or number 4 of that list that you've just provided?
It's a really good question. Like, if I was going to prioritize one thing, it would just be timing. So I would just, you know, the way that I think about this is, imagine if you bought just one property in Sydney 10 years ago, or one property in Melbourne 7 years ago. How much better off you'd be in 2018 as a result.
That's a really good point.
So
most properties doubling, you obviously stand to be able to make whatever you were able to borrow at the time.
So if you know nothing else about property but figuring out how to buy the right area, being Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Wollongong, Ballarat, at that right time, then that is the only thing that you need how to learn to do.
Okay.
And Herron Todd White makes that really easy because you can see where each of those markets are at every single month.
Yeah.
In a nice little, you know, report that's very simple for anyone to read regardless of your experience level.
Okay. Fantastic. So I guess that leads us into, if it's timing the market right. Is it also timing for Todd and Hannah themselves? Like, do you think now's the best time for them to do it, or is there potential for it to be a better time in, say, 12 months or 6 months down the track, or whenever it could be?
It's a really good question and super difficult to answer, because regardless of if we're in a boom or a bust market, timing has really nothing to do with that unless you're investing purely for that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I believe that right now, as you know, I'm very active right now in terms of buying property. More active than I've ever been in the last 12 months. We've probably done more deals.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is I believe there's a lot of people sitting on the fence right now for no reason that will realise in a couple of years' time that, shit, it would have been really nice to buy something, and they just missed it.
Yeah.
Not missed it, just have to pay extra at that time.
To be honest, I went through a similar situation when I would have been, I think, 19, and my brother and I we were that close, like we had contracts and everything to purchase a house on the Sunshine Coast where we were living at the time, and there's problems with purchasing with your brother, and there's a lot of issues that could have come up, and we weren't in a financial position to tackle the property we were looking to buy at the time. And luckily my father stopped in and kind of said, no, don't go ahead with this, because it was going to require a lot of work and a renovation, and we didn't have the funds to do that.
Yeah.
But in looking at that, even if we didn't do any of those renovations, we know we could hold on to that property until now, and we still would have made a considerable amount of money by just getting in the cycle back then and getting in there, and that would have still rode through the GFC, and we still would have made money by the end of it. And because it was 2 income earners, my brother and I, and we both were working full time, it was quite easy for us to hold on to that property. So I look back and think maybe I should have jumped in then, but at the same time, who knows if I would have held it on through that. As my dad kind of brought up, renovating might not have been the best an option that was feasible for us at that point in time. So I see where you're coming from with timing. I look back and think I should have done it, but it's not always that clear cut, and I guess everyone's situations are different.
Every single investor has that same story. Like, everyone's mum and dad has that property they should have bought or held on to. Everyone's got that, thinking about it 5 years ago in Sydney, now we've missed it, story going on. And every person that invests for the long term is always going to have that. I've got heaps of properties that I missed or thought were too expensive at the time that have now doubled in 5 years.
Yeah, wow.
You know, like, it's just how it is. What I do get to see that most other people don't, and the same with yourself, is because we do talk to about 600 to 1,000 investors every year on those complimentary strategy sessions, you start to see the patterns, I suppose, in people that, you know, let's say Todd and Hannah's 30 now.
Yeah.
And let's say, you know, like most people, they just go through the process of, you know, just doing the kid thing for the next 15 years. And a lot of the people that we help are now Todd and Hannah 15 years on that haven't got started because life just got in the way. And there's no problem getting started at 45 or 55, but what it means is if it's a 15 to 20 year journey to get financially free, I'm talking about fully replacing your current annual salary through property, then if you're starting at 45, it's going to be 60 to 65 before you get there.
Yeah.
If you're starting at 30, it means that by the time you're 45 to 50, you're done. And so that is the only thing I have to say. Like, obviously you never buy at the top of a market and you don't buy in the first couple of years of a GFC. But outside of that, if it's a 20-year buy and hold strategy, even if it only goes up by 4% a year, you're going to double your money every 20 years. And that is a great position to be in.
Yeah.
So, you know, I look back now and I go, I could have done things a lot better. But the one thing that I did do that a lot of my friends haven't done, and I'm 33 now, is get started.
Yeah.
And at 33, I've got all sorts of exciting opportunities in front of me for the next 18 years or 17 years till I'm 50, that because I've done hard work at that age, you know, other people are just going to always be paying catch up because of that compound effect of, you know, value over time.
Yeah. Compounding. Yeah. It's a scary thing.
It's insane what happens.
It's a scary or exciting thing.
Yeah. You know, it's scary or exciting. Perfect way to explain that, eh?
Yeah.
But, you know, it is scary investing in property. It is scary taking a risk. It's scary the unknown, and it's scary looking at all the information out there and videos like this and going, shit, there's heaps of different ways to do the same thing.
Yeah.
But if you just get your head around, you know, I do want to consider this and I'm going to do what it takes over the next 12 months to figure it out. It's a couple of hours of the right sort of stuff a week is going to get you the result. You know, that's 100 hours over a year better educated you'll be.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's got to start there and then go there. And, you know, the way that I think about this is if you don't take action, you know exactly where you're going to be. And that's cool. Like, you know.
That's a really good point.
You know exactly where you're going to be, and it's exactly where you are now, with probably no more savings in the bank because life has a funny way of sucking money out of here and spending it somewhere.
Yeah.
So you may as well choose where you spend it. But let's say you were to just buy a $400,000 home today, and we're not talking about breaking any world records with capital growth. You just get an average property that goes up by 4.8% a year for the next 15 years. That $400,000 over the next 15 years has now become an $800,000 property.
Yep.
If it only goes up by 4% a year for the next 20 years, over 20 years you've still doubled your money. Think about how hard it is for you to save based on your current salary right now. 400 grand tax free over the next fucking 15 years. It just can't be done.
No, it can't.
You're not going to do it regardless of if you're earning 300 grand a year or you're earning 50 grand a year. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I like to think about that, and these numbers aren't 100%, and they're not 100% because we don't really have 100% numbers, but if you even just pull a figure of, say, 5% on average increase to property compared to where your income's increasing at the moment, which is what might be 2 to 3%. So
max, not even.
So even like right now you can't afford it, but in 20 years that gap's going to get bigger, and you're definitely not going to be able to afford it. So yeah, I like what you're saying there.
You know, so like regardless of where you start or when you start, as long as it's a long-term strategy, you will end up okay. You know, just you can't freak out when other people are freaking out and sell at the wrong time. That's the only thing that gets people unstuck with this whole thing. So I think, you know, it's heaps exciting thinking about talking about your first one. And, you know, whether you're ready to do it today or you're ready to do it in 12 months or 2 years, starting earlier is always going to make Todd and Hannah significantly better off.
Yeah.
You know, you might not be a millionaire straight away, but over time, the compounding effect of owning good quality assets at the right time and paying them off is going to give you, your family, your kids, everything that you've always wanted. It's just, do you want to wait till you're 60 or 70 to get that? Or do you want to be strategic and bring that forward by 5, 10, 20 years? Yeah.
So I tried to use Todd and Hannah as a bit of a case study or example, but something that seems pretty clear is it's quite hard to do because everyone's situation's different. Is that something that you see day to day, that it is different for every single person? And like, although timing is important and to try and get in the market when you can, it's also trying to figure out the rest of your life and just where that fits in. And would you say it's more important to have a plan than it is to just try and do the right actions.
100%. That's such a good point. Like, having a clear plan in place. You know, the plan could be as simple as, I'm going to own a $400,000 investment property within 2 years from today.
Yeah.
And having that line in the sand means that you've got to figure out, okay, I need a deposit, I need to get finance, I need to understand the marketplace, I need to understand a suburb, you know, and you can break that into a series of very little achievable steps each month that you and the family can work on. So having a really clear plan in place is the number one thing that I find 80% of people that don't achieve financial freedom don't have.
Yeah, that was a big thing with me. Like, I always felt like I was doing the right things and taking the right steps, but at the same time, I didn't have a long-term plan. I barely had a short-term plan. And I would get to the end of that short-term plan, and if things went well and like my planning was right, it would always hit a point that, okay, that's done, I've accomplished that now, and I might move on to something else or lose focus. Whereas the older I get, the more important I realize it is to think really long-term and to now start planning long-term. And once you do that, it seems like the steps simplify, the steps get easier, because instead of trying to do something that takes 5 years and do it in 1 year, which is almost impossible, I'm looking at doing something that could take 5 years, stretch it out over 10, and do it in a way that's comfortable and I can keep moving forward. So
that's the big thing, bro. Like, you just absolutely nailed it on the hand. The difference between getting started and where my headspace was at that time versus where it is now is, at that time I thought I could do everything I wanted to do in 5 years. Now I realise that, you know, financial independence is a 15 to 20 year thing. Yeah. And that takes so much pressure off me to achieve everything in a really short period of time and freak everyone out around me about that. You know what I mean? Like, it's,
yeah, definitely.
It's a process and it takes time. And if it was that easy to go and replicate your income in a day, then nobody would end up on the pension, and we wouldn't have anybody on Centrelink, and everything would be easy, you know what I mean? But this is as long as the plan's in place, like, it's like jumping in a sailing boat, man. Like, you can jump in and you can tic-tac your way to the destination, or you can just let the wind blow you. Both ways you're going to end up somewhere, but that somewhere is a lot better if you're the one that's determining where you end up, as opposed to just getting sucked along by the media, the people in your life, your partner. You know, my partner doesn't love investing, but she fucking loves the money that she's got now as a result of the work that I've done for 10 years to get her in that point. Yeah. You know, she's able to live where she wants to live, in a beautiful home with our little renovated caravan and a, you know, car that we take up the beach once a year. And drive the kids to school in, like a 4-wheel drive, you know what I'm saying? Like, she's got a better life than we had for the last 10 years because other people are now paying for it. Yeah. You know, equity from selling a property is paying for it. Passive rental income from properties that we have low debt on is now paying for those expenses that I couldn't justify for a long time. Yeah. And most people, unfortunately, jump straight into, I want to look like I've got the life, and spend it all, as opposed to, I've created the life and now I have whatever I want, whenever I want, for the rest of my life. And not in a crazy material way, just in my basic needs are being met. And now I can focus on those higher things that are important to me: contribution, starting a business, spending more time with my kids, choices, as opposed to the fluff of just buying more, working more, buying more, working more debt. You know, not really getting any further forward, but pretending you are by swimming against the current. Yeah.
So I guess going back to that Hannah and Blake example, they're like, the most important thing they can do right now is, I guess, come up with a long-term plan. And they can do that. They could do that whether they had the $50,000 in the bank, or they could do that whether they didn't even own their first property. You could still start with coming up with a plan today, correct?
And a plan sounds overwhelming. Just start with this. Regardless of where you are, whatever your current combined annual salary is, your goal in 15 years is to replace it with passive income for life. I love that. That's it.
I love the idea of reverse engineering anything, because it just has a great way of simplifying what you have to do to get there. And when you think 15 years, the part I love about that is you're no longer, like you said earlier, you're not in a rush to get there right now.
Man.
And some people, like, even people that we'll work with, they understand it's 15 years, but it's still, okay, well, we've got to do everything for that 15-year outcome in this first 6 months. Once that's all done, then we'll just wait out 15 years. But things don't always work out that way. Not everyone's in a position to make things happen that quickly. So I like the idea that you don't just plan for your outcome or your goal to be in 15 years time, but you plan to take actions along the road towards that 15 years as well. Do you think that's an important thing to do, to plan accurately time-wise?
No.
Go for it.
Like, because I'm a very good planner at planning the next step.
Yeah.
I'm an amazing planner and achiever of setting out something at the start of the year and achieving it. My 12-month goals I'm always clear on, and before I start the year I know exactly what they are.
Yeah.
And then I break that 12-month goal, I forget about it, and then I just focus on the next step in front of me, and that is it.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of knowing where I'm going and exactly what I'm doing next, I don't think about anything else.
Yeah.
And then I have a line in the sand point in the future, which if I do the 12-month thing and I do the next step, it lines up to that.
Yeah.
But I'm not a break it down to 15 years, because anyone that's got a family out there knows that your kid can get sick, you can lose a job, you can fall pregnant again, you can have 3 kids in 5 years like I did. You know, shit changes, and regardless of how you're planning for it, you could fall pregnant.
Yeah.
You know, like...
Okay.
And so if you're rigid with a 15-year plan, it's too hard to tweak your day-to-day behaviours to respond to the opportunities and disadvantages in your life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can see what you mean by that. So it's the idea of having a vision or a goal for that 15-year point, reverse engineering it back from there, figuring out what you've got to do, but don't think too far ahead, and just do reassess every 12 months. Is that how you'd set your goals again?
Yeah, I just look at where I am and where I want to be, and exactly that, just calibrate or reassess, tweak it based on where I'm at. Like,
yeah. So we've got a point here and you're aiming to get there and things start to go out this way, then it's just, okay, recalibrate to make sure the actions I'm taking still gets me to my goal.
And some years you're just fatigued. Some years you're like, man, work is just crushing me. I've changed jobs, I've moved houses, I'm renting, I'm renovating my own home. My baby's going insane. Like, we've had one really amazing baby, one really hard baby, and one in the middle. Like, that stuff comes up as a parent.
Yeah.
It's completely cool. You know, some years I've done nothing. Like, there was a couple of years where I literally didn't buy a single property because I focused on this business.
Yeah.
But I knew if I focused on this business, it would enable me to speed the journey up medium term. So...
You say you didn't purchase any properties, but personally, how many do you think you would have bought through the business though? So
yeah, exactly. You know, I got my fix from buying 150 properties a year.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, like, I don't know, I think it all comes back to just simplicity now. Like, I used to overcomplicate everything and break it down to all these different areas in my life and all these goals under each area. Now it's 3, maybe 4 things financially I'm focusing on in the next 12 months. Yep. It might be as simple as, you know, saving some money, paying off some debt, cleaning up that home, or buying another investment. And my goals are that easy. There's no more detail in them outside of that.
Yeah.
You know, buy investment.
So I guess
500k.
So I guess with Todd and Hannah, they've got the equity to be able to borrow. They're in a position to be able to move forward straight away. So their next step in their plan would think about is purchasing that investment property. But obviously, if you're not in that position and you haven't saved up that money, or you haven't even purchased your first home, might not be what you decide to do first, could be investment, but it's as simple as setting that next goal, which could be a savings goal, it could be a spendings goal to flip it back around, it could just simply be some sort of money management goal to get you into that position first and start doing that. So I like that, I love that actually. So it's just as simple as planning for the immediate future, which you can control, but keeping in mind that long-term vision.
Yeah, because the reality of buying property is it can be stressful and uncomfortable, and if your vision of your future isn't strong enough to pull you through all the shit, that's why most people only get to 1-2 properties in Australia. Like, I think it's less than, I wouldn't know the number off the top of my head, but I think it's less than 5% of Aussies ever get past property 2 as a whole, and less than, you know, 80% of investors ever get to property 3. And, you know, nothing's wrong with one property, but you're not going to be able to live off just one property alone in the future unless you tweak the strategy to a higher risk strategy down the line, or have a really high cash flow property. So, there's heaps of different ways to get the same result. I just think taking action earlier, even though it's a bit more uncomfortable here, ending up on the pension or having to take on massive risk when you're older in life is a far worse scenario. And I've seen my parents go through that, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this have seen theirs go through the same thing, where they're either set up now and not stressing on it, or really stressing about how they're going to figure out that next 30 years of their life as they move into retirement.
Yeah, definitely. My parents are split up at the moment, and I've got a really contrasting view between the two of them, and it's not necessarily not investing right, but to be honest, that's what it comes back down to. I can look at my father's position, and he's in a position where he's not rich or really wealthy or anything by that means, but he's comfortable and he's secure for the rest of his life. And on the other side, my mum's position, she may have made some poor choices at certain points of her life, and she's not in that strong financial position, and it is something that she stresses about still. Not that she necessarily has to, because she's going to be fine.
Yeah.
But it's still something that's constantly a conversation for her, and something that's always playing in the back of their head. So it is good motivation for me personally to not put myself in that position and be able to help my mum out a little bit.
And we're not talking about taking on crazy risk or buying 10 properties in 10 years or any of that old school stuff. A couple of really good properties that tick those 4 boxes we mentioned before, or one of those boxes that you hold for 30 years and you just pay principal and interest off for 30 years worst case.
Yep.
The thing about property is you will get financially free if you're disciplined over the long term. But you can do a lot better than just waiting 30 years to figure it out by doing it the hard way. And that's, I suppose, why you're watching this video as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly why. So I don't know, I think we got a little bit of insight out of that one, and I really like the idea that someone in Todd and Hannah's position can move forward fine. We've talked about, I guess, getting it started. To flip it over a little bit, what about if they're in that position that now they've got their first investment property, it's costing them, let's say, $50 a week to hold on to that property, they're managing that fine. When do they decide that it's right to make that purchase number 2, or to start aiming for that investment, sorry, not property number 2, it's property number 3, but investment number 2?
So again, there's a whole lot of stuff going on there, and it's all between here and here. The reality is your decisions, there's a financial reality and there's a market reality, and the financial reality is you can afford to do it or you can't.
Okay.
The market reality is it's a good time to buy or not buy. Yeah. And if it is a good time to buy and you're in a financial position to do it, then everything else is between here and here. And it comes down to, do you feel comfortable doing that? Can you afford to take that action?
Yeah.
What are the positives and negatives with that? What's the worst case scenario? And maybe instead of just buying your standard property that you start losing another $50 or $100 a week on, you go for a property that you get your growth on, but you become a bit more active because now it's third time round, and you buy a house and you add a granny flat so that you've got passive cash flow coming through, not just the position where you're sitting there treading water or losing some money each week.
Yep.
But you really don't want to sacrifice the long-term growth of the property, which means still buying good quality stuff. It's just chasing your cash flow as well. Yeah,
so it sounds like it's a little bit of a balancing board on which way to go, but I guess with the right property selection and making those choices right, it can take that sort of seesaw action away from it, and you can find something quite balanced that allows you to keep moving forward. And is that the plan that you think Todd and Hannah should be going for? Yeah, so ultimately as investors we want a balanced portfolio from a cash flow and a growth perspective, and your next step might not necessarily be that one. It might just be another growth property because you're earning really good combined income. But for Todd and Hannah, based on a single income of 80k and that position, I wouldn't want them to be taking on huge amounts of risk or debt, or being worried about interest rates rising in the future and then that affecting the family and their lifestyle. So I would be assuming that the strategy for round 3 would probably be more orientated towards cash flow plus growth, with cash flow being the major focus. Yeah. If say for example I said that was costing him $50 a week, if we could go back to that first property, do you think it's more important to make sure you get that cash flow on the first one as well to try and make that second one a little bit easier? I've got a concept which is the 2 properties to financial freedom thing, and we've talked about it in previous videos, but effectively I believe that getting financially free is very simple.
you buy 2 houses, you add 2 granny flats. So effectively you got 4 pieces of income coming through from, you know, the 2 houses and 2 granny flats. And the reason I like that as a foundation is because if you were to execute on that, let's say 1 house and 1 granny flat rents for $700 a week today. You just add, you know, the effect of inflation over 15 years, that's going to rent for $1,000 a week. If you own 2 of them, 15 years from now, you're going to earn $2,000 a week, which is 100 grand a year of passive income. Now, if you were to do nothing else but just do those 2 houses and 2 granny flats and do it the hard way, which is pay principal and interest on a 25 to 30 year loan, you are going to be financially free at that time. But for some people, you know, you might be able to figure out a way to achieve it faster than that. So
well, I guess if you think about the granny flat increasing your rent and it's positively geared, then if you're just injecting that cash flow straight back into the loan, that would cut your time from 25 to 30 down to, I guess it depends on the investment and the asset that you choose to build, but what you could see it come down to 20 years to 15 years. I guess it's,
you know, paying some of that off, using the depreciation benefits from the property, parking your extra savings or income into offset accounts. There's so many ways that you can peel it back. And you know, what I believe is that if 80% of investors don't go past 2 properties, then you need a strategy. You don't want to be the outlier or the exception or the 5% high performer. If you're playing the average game, 2 houses, 2 granny flats is comfortable for most people. Get your foundation set, and then after you've got your foundation in place, knowing that you will be financially free if you're disciplined, then the next step is one question: how can I do this faster? Which we call acceleration phase, and that is, how can we speed this up from 25 years to 15? And you know, what other options do I have once I feel comfortable? So I think setting a foundation, if I could do it all again and I was in their position buying my first investment, I would be doing it that way. Then I lock in financial freedom, and everything I do after that is just cherry on top and giving me more lifestyle in the future.
Lovely. I like that idea that it does simplify it. It controls what you can control in that space, and then you can go from there and try and do what you can do to maximize it. So that's great. I feel like we've touched on a lot of different ideas here, and it's kind of gone around in circles a little bit. But overall, I guess the important parts is to take away from this is, Todd and Hannah, you need to go out and get a plan, and there's no time like the present. But I guess there's other factors to come into all that. And if you did need help in that, what would you suggest, Ben?
I mean, you can keep watching these types of videos and listen to the podcasts, and you know, read the Heron Todd White reports and check out the books and stuff around this space. Alternatively, you could jump over to our website www.pumpedonproperty.com and book a completely complimentary strategy session with myself or my brother Simon, where we'll talk about where you are and where you would like to be in 15 to 20 years. We're not financial advisors. We're certainly not giving you advice or a plan, but we've got ideas around how that 2 property strategy could work. And we could, you know, talk about where the market's at, where your challenges lie, and how to overcome them, and how to create, you know, a plan for your next step, the next 12 months, and, you know, put in a line in the sand in 15 years so that you've got all 3 of those things that I look for personally. And, you know, that's complimentary. We only take on a limited number of clients each month, so there's no pressure there to work with us, not work with us. We just love contributing back, and we offer about 20 of those sessions to people a week.
Perfect. Awesome. So great chat. Enjoyed it. It was a little bit more relaxed than usual. I hope you guys liked it, and yeah, stay tuned. There'll be more to come.